Hello and welcome to Templar Knight TV. I've been researching the trials of the Knights Templar between 1307 and 1312 for a book that will be coming out later this year, Downfall of the Templars. Now, the more I've researched, the more I've become convinced that yes, there was a financial motive to the crushing of the Templars. King Philip IV of France wanted to get his hands on their money to finance his wars against England. However, I think there's more to it than that. It's just a little too cynical, if you want, to attribute that as the sole motive behind what King Philip IV of France was doing. Because if you look at what was going on at the time that he went after the Knights Templar, he was actually pursuing multiple heresy trials. For example, against an all-female group of preachers, the Beguines, and he had one of them burnt around the same time that he burnt 54 Templars, same month in fact, in 1310. And he was also going after the Bishop of Troyes, who he accused of killing his wife, the Queen, Queen Joan, using sorcery, using magic. In fact, she died in childbirth. But he pursued this trial for years. And then on top of that, he was also pursuing Pope Boniface VIII on charges of sorcery, black magic, simony, heresy, and so on. The unusual thing about this trial is that Pope Boniface VIII was dead, but that didn't actually stop King Philip IV of France going after him. So what I think was happening here was that we're seeing the beginning of a combining of heresy and witchcraft, heresy and sorcery. Because basically what we're seeing is the beginning of the witchcraft mania, the witch hunting mania that would take off in the following century, in the 15th century. And elements of those witch trials that would so dominate Europe for 200-300 years from the 1400s, elements of those witch hunting trials can be seen in the trials of the Knights Templar. So, for example, the obscene kisses on the base of the spine. We see witches kissing the devil on his backside, the so-called osculum infame. We also have the worship of evil cats mentioned with the Templars. Well, we all know about witches and their evil cats. We have the Templars worshipping a demon called Baphomet. Again, witches are also heretics because they're in league with the devil. So if you get my drift, what we're seeing really with the trial of the Knights Templar is a foreshadowing of what was about to happen across Europe, the witch hunting mania of the 1400s through to the 1700s. Interestingly, going after witches had been something really confined to ill-educated, illiterate villagers up until this point in the Middle Ages. In fact, the church didn't expend a great deal of effort going after witches prior to the 1300s. But then there's a change, and as there are more challenges to the papacy, and as we see monarchs like King Philip who are trying to exert more power over their realm, we also see this combining of charges of heresy with charges of witchcraft. If you want, it beefs up heresy charges. It makes them sexier, you could almost say. And so witchcraft moves from being something that is a preoccupation of, pretty thick villagers in rural France or rural England to being something that becomes a matter of high state, something that becomes an elite matter, and you have kings and popes becoming extremely interested in witchcraft. In fact, Pope Clement V is the pope who goes after the Knights Templar. He also prosecuted a lot of heretics, but it's the pope after him, Pope John, who was obsessed with sorcery and witchcraft, who believed that there were assassination attempts on his life using voodoo dolls smuggled into the papal palace. So there is a drift towards a greater interest in witchcraft, a greater interest in magic in this period of the Middle Ages. And I believe that the Knights Templar were essentially swept up in this movement. They became, as it were, the first victims of this growing witchcraft mania. Now, you may think he's talking nonsense. If you do think I'm talking nonsense, then please tell me. I'm always happy to have your opinions. I don't care if they're positive or negative. I like a good debate. So please leave your comments down below. Also, do me a favour and get a copy of my book, The Knights Templar History and Mystery. It's a rollicking good read. Of course, I'd say that I'm the author, but seriously, it is. And also, I hope you look forward to my book that's coming out later this year, Downfall of the Templars, where I will be talking specifically about the trials of the Knights Templar. And then next year, I'll have a book out on the connection between the Templars and Freemasonry. I know you'll all be interested in that. In the meantime, however, until I see you again, as I believe the Knights Templar used to say, non nobis domine.